City of Salmon regular council meeting of Monday, July the 22nd. We have a proposed agenda. Is there any additions from staff to the agenda?
None from staff, Your Worship.
Thank you. Any additions from council to the agenda? Councillor Cannon.
Thank you, Your Worship. Under council statements, I would like to bring back the motion that we made at the last meeting in regards to Interfor and the timber licenses.
Okay, when we get to council statements, I'll go to you first. Any other additions? Seeing none. Disclosure of interest, Councillor. Is there any disclosure of interest on any of the items? Okay, seeing none, we'll move into our agenda. Item 5.1 is confirmation of minutes for the regular council meeting of July the 8th, 2019. We have a motion.
Moved by Councillor Cannon, seconded by Councillor Wallace Richmond, that the regular council meeting minutes of July 8, 2019 be adopted as circulated.
Thank you. Any additions or omissions? All those in favor? Thank you. Item 6.1, Development Planning Services Committee meeting minutes of July the 15th. We have a motion.
Moved by Councillor Flynn, seconded by Councillor Cannon, that the Development and Planning Services Committee meeting minutes of July 15, 2019 be received as information.
Are there any additions or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you. 6.2, Downtown Parking Commission meeting minutes of June the 18th, 2019. We have a motion.
Moved by Councillor Lyson, seconded by Councillor Lavery, that the Downtown Parking Commission meeting minutes of June 18, 2019 be received as information.
Thank you. Any additions, omissions, questions on those minutes? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Thank you. 6.3, Social Impact Advisory Committee meeting minutes of July the 12th, 2019. We have a motion.
Moved by Councillor Wallace Richmond, seconded by Councillor Flynn, that the Social Impact Advisory Committee meeting minutes of July 12, 2019 be received as information.
Councillor Wallace Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. During our last meeting, we have been very fortunate to have Okanagan Regional Library attend a number of our meetings. We have been meeting through the summer. We're always concerned about quorum, so it's the wish of the committee to add the Okanagan Regional Library as a representative to SIAC, and if you're willing, I would like to make that motion now.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Is there a seconder to the motion? Councillor Lavery. Just before we discuss the motion, we just ask staff if there's any implications from them.
Or do we have to approve the minutes first and then?
I would suggest that you deal with the minutes first.
Okay.
Okay.
No, sorry.
All right, we'll just put that motion in abeyance first. Is there any other comments on the minutes? Okay, seeing none, I'll call a question on the minutes. All those in favor? Hey, Councillor Wallace Richmond, if you'd like to redo your motion, please.
Yeah, it's important to include the library in the Social Impact Advisory Committee, as the library is a very important gathering space for many demographics, especially including our most vulnerable citizens. And they are willing, and we are very fortunate to have them offer their expertise and experience. And I encourage my colleagues to vote in favor of this motion to include them as a member.
Okay, seconder. Councillor Lavery, would you like to speak further to the motion? Councillor Lavery.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I think it's a great idea. Up and down the valley with the regional library, staff get training in dealing with the wide range of clientele there, and I think this is great. My question, and maybe it's a clarification one, are we really talking about clarifying the terms of reference for the committee to add that? And is that a process? So we do this in, and maybe through your Worship, it's a question to staff. I note that in the committee's ISS, the terms of reference list those who are the members. So do we vote now? Do we defer this? Do we bring it up as a term of reference? Do we just adjust the terms of reference here on the fly?
Good question, Councillor Lavery. I see in the minutes, Okanagan Regional Library is listed for the July 12th meeting, and that Christy Woodcock, now I think she might be on the wrong line. I'm assuming she's an Okanagan College person, is that correct? Is Christy the Okanagan Library person? Okay, so do I misunderstand your motion?
She is, Your Worship, in our meeting, we have open meetings, so oftentimes there are people there who are attending for different reasons or to provide presentations or information, so they're always listed as having been in attendance. I guess my assumption was that Okanagan Regional Library was already a member, but I might have misunderstood that, and so we needed to clean that up in the terms of reference.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll ask the corporate officer. I think it's me who may be confused. Corporate officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Christy and her predecessor, James Leighton, have been participating for some time at the table at SIAC. And so this is basically a housekeeping. We can amend the terms of reference if council so wishes to add Okanagan Regional membership to the committee. And I believe that it will really create no issue in doing so.
Okay. So your motion then, Councillor Wallace-Richmond, is to add Okanagan Regional Library to the terms of reference. Sorry, I think I misunderstood that.
Yes, as a member, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Lavery, did you want to comment further? Okay. Any other discussion on that motion? All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Item 8, we don't have a CSRD update this week, so we'll go to staff reports. Item 8.1, Chief Financial Officer, Property Tax Collection is for information. I'll ask the Chief Financial Officer if she would like to comment.
Thank you, Your Worship. The enclosed memo just summarizes for your information the city's tax collection statistics and penalty revenues as of July 3rd. The associated adjusted penalty amount at the bottom is consistent with the 2019 budget.
Thank you very much. Questions or comments from council? Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Worship. Nice to see the percentage collected goes up, although that's a catch-22 because then we don't get as much penalty revenue. But I did have a question, the penalty reversal. As I read that, people were assessed a penalty if they chose, because they're over 65, to defer their taxes, and you have to reverse that. Is that what that means?
Chief Financial Officer.
Yes, it is a deferment program of the province. It is for people in addition to those over 65. There's a families option as well. But how it works is those applications are collected by the city and forwarded off to the province. So we assess a penalty, and then once those funds are received, we then reverse it, because not in all cases are those applications approved. And if that's the case, then the penalty will still apply.
So
But based on that, that's our estimate.
are we seeing more of those applications?
Yes.
Yeah. What percentage is the penalty of your property tax?
10% penalty.
10%. So this year we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 300,000 of property taxes that were applied to be deferred. Is that, if I'm doing the math right in my head?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Any other comments? Just like to say, I think 95.25% of all taxes collected by the due date sounds very impressive to me. That's like an A+ regularly.
That's pretty good.
Yes.
Yes.
And so thank you to you, and thank you to your staff, and especially to the front counter women and men who are collecting there. I was there often, and I thought it went very smoothly. They were courteous, and for the most part, members of the public were as well. So thank you to you and your department.
Yes, thank you.
Appreciate it. Any other comments from council? All right, we'll move ahead to 8.2. Chief Administrative Officer Report, dated June the 10th, Canoe Beach Campsites, rental agreements, original motion and background, and this is for information for council. Councillors, do you have any questions? You know that we do have a delegation later that's coming to our council meeting. Questions there? Councillor Flynn?
I was just going to ask if we could move this to after the delegation for any discussion, because I'd like to hear from them before to decide if I even will make any comment or anything.
Certainly, I think that's a good idea. It is for information, so we can consider it after the delegation for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. We'll move forward then to 8.3, Chief Financial Officer, Annual Financial Audit Services, 2019, 2020, and 2021. I'll ask the Chief Financial Officer to comment on her report.
Thank you, Your Worship. The city's audit services contract ended in 2018, and as required by Policy 7.6, a request for proposal was sent out to local area accounting firms for a 3-year term with a city option to extend for an additional 2-year period. We received 4 proposals, all of which met the required submission criteria. We've evaluated each proposal against the criteria that are listed on page 38 of your package. A summary of the proposals is included for your reference on page 39, as well as a breakdown of the proposed fees and percentage change over the prior year. All of the proposals met the technical experience and qualifications that would be required. MNP's proposal specifically was the lowest cost. However, staff had some concerns with the proposed audit approach and the implications of it on the staff time. Further, transitional costs of switching auditing firms is unknown and could be either high or low. BDO has an excellent understanding of the city's structure, governance, and processes and has worked well with the city for a number of years. Their proposed fees are higher, however, are low in comparison with similar sized municipalities. They are consistent with inflation, and they are within the city's approved 2019 budget of $20,000. So we are recommending that BDO be awarded the contract for audit services.
Thank you. I'll open that up to council. Councillors, do you have questions? Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. I was pleased to see that work was done from a comparative perspective. Other municipalities similar to us in size. So is the audit, are there separate functions that BDO plays, or the audit and the financial statements are all in one?
Chief Financial Officer?
Your Worship, the city prepares the financial statements, and we actually prep the financial statements that are sent to BDO, but as part of the audit, they audit those statements specifically, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Cannon?
I was just curious, is BDO the only local firm on those quotes?
Yes, up until this year, Grant Thornton has recently taken over Drew Lehigh and Associates, so they are now Grant Thornton. They do not have an auditing staff within the Salmon Arm office. Their proposal indicated that there was one manager there that would oversee the audit. However, majority of the work and the partner would be located, I believe, out of their Kelowna office.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I will call a question and all those in favor. Any opposed? Thank you. Passes unanimously.
Your Worship, we didn't actually have a mover and seconder on that, so.
Thank you, Councillor Eliason, Councillor Cannon. Thank you very much. Let's read the motion, then if I could have the administrative officer read the motion.
Moved by Councillor Eliason, seconded by Councillor Cannon, that BDO Canada Chartered Accountants be appointed as municipal auditors for the City of Salmon Arm for the 3-year term 2019 to 2021, with $19,100 plus taxes in 2019, $19,600 plus taxes in 2020, and $20,000 plus taxes in 2021.
Great, thank you. I'll give one more opportunity then for any comments or questions. Okay, seeing none, I'll call a question. All those in favor? Thank you. We'll move to 8.4, Director of Engineering and Public Works, purchase recommendation for replacement of unit number 86, rubber backhoe. Director of Engineering and Public Works.
Your Worship, this report deals with the request for quotations for one rubber-tired backhoe. We have 2 in our fleet, and they're utilized during the summer months and the winter months for snow clearing. One is being replaced out of the Equipment Replacement Reserve Fund, and we have budgeted $200,000, and we received 2 quotes, one from Brandt Tractor and one from Inland Kenworth, and you'll see that the recommendation is for the Brandt Tractor. A lot of this had to do with the warranty cost difference as well as the trade-in value for the existing the backhoe. So we're recommending that Brandt Tractor be awarded the supply and delivery of this piece of equipment.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Eliason, second. Councillor Flynn. Discussion or questions? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Thank you. Passes unanimously. Item 8.5, Director of Development Services, Agriculture Advisory Committee appointments. We have a proposed motion. I'll maybe get the motion before I have the director speak to it. Who would like to move that motion? Councillor Eliason? Councillor Lavery? Thank you. Director of Development Services.
Your Worship, the Agricultural Advisory Committee's term runs out in approximately 1 year from now, and presently there are 2 members short on that committee. So there's 6 people, plus the chair, Councillor Lavery being the chair. We advertised for 2 positions in late spring of this year, and we were unsuccessful, and then we immediately advertised again for another 2 editions in the newspaper, and we have 2 people interested, Barry Voth and Mike Schroeder, both in the agricultural industry. One is an organic farmer, and the other is a member of the BC Goat Association, among other agricultural organizations.
Great, thank you very much. Any comments or questions? Councillor Lavery.
Thanks, Your Worship. I just urge support of this. There's been open positions on this committee for a while, and both applicants are bring experience, and they're also a younger voice to the farming community as well. So I'd urge us to accept them.
Thank you. Any other comments? All those in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you. Item 8.6, Director of Corporate Services, Community Housing Strategy RFP Award. We have a proposed motion. We have a mover, Councillor Walsh-Richmond, seconder. Councillor Lavery, would you like to second that as a co-chair? Thank you. Thank you. I'll ask the corporate officer to discuss the report with us.
Thank you, Your Worship. The RFP for the Community Housing Strategy was issued on May 31st and closed on June 28th, 2019. 6 proposals were received, and the Director of Development Services and myself reviewed in depth those proposals and shortlisted it down to 3, which were passed on to the co-chairs of the Housing Task Force for review. And after an extensive review, it was concluded that Urban Matters CCC was the preferred proponent. And you will note that Urban Matters is the highest priced of the list, but the city's purchasing policy recognizes that in addition to price, there are other determinants of value. And it was felt after the review that the experience that Urban Matters can bring to this project is the value that we're seeking. And I would like the Director of Development Services to add any additional comments.
Director of Development Services, and then I'll give the co-chairs a chance to speak if they wish.
Your Worship, I concur with the corporate officer on this analysis. It was very close, and in my analysis, within 4 or 5 points of the top 3. And I chose Urbanics, and mostly that was due to price. But I think the other candidate who is being recommended in this report would be very well suited for it.
Thank you. Do the co-chairs, would they like to comment, or would you just like to open it up to councillors? Councillor Flynn, is it okay if we let Councillor Walsh-Richmond speak?
Answer my questions.
Okay. Councillor Walsh-Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. So this has been an ongoing process. We know the task force was struck a year and a half ago. It's important to keep this moving forward. In reviewing the proposals, we also looked at, or what was important for me was to look at previous work and the outcome, and which I sensed from my experience as co-chair was the direction that the task force was looking for. And so that was instrumental in my decision making. I respect staff's work and their process, and I agree it was very close. I'm confident either would have delivered a good product, but I think the product that we're seeking is a bit more in depth than one of the proposals had shown in their experience.
Thank you. I'll just go to Councillor Lavery and then I'll come back to Councillor Flynn's question. Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Harrison. I concur, and thanks to staff for it. There's been a lot of hard work into framing what we want in out of a housing policy. And so I'd concur with Councillor Wallace-Richmond's comments. For those of you who were at Silga in Revelstoke 2 Silgas ago, Matt Thompson presented on those matters. And my take is certainly that Urban Matters, and with Matt as the lead, we will get rigorous policy options presented to us, and I felt that we would get that rigor more with going that route.
Great, thank you. Okay, Councillor Flynn, thank you for your patience.
No problem. I was hoping to get my answers, but I'm just going to make a comment. I value the fact that we can analyze within our purchasing policy pros and cons of each proposal, knowing though that is somewhat up to the individual analyzing. A couple things. I will vote in support of the motion because I have seen the work Urban Matters does and do believe that we will get very good value. But when they are the highest, I know it says it was shortlisted to 3. From my point of view, being the having to make a decision, I'd like to know who were shortlisted. And I guess if there's an analysis done to come up with a point system, of the 3 shortlisted, I would like to know what those numbers are. And it could be all of them analyzed that way, but I think it was just the shortlist. But I'm not questioning the work done by staff, and I'm not questioning the work done by the committee, and I am going to support the motion. I just think in the future, if we shortlist, it would be helpful for me to know who's on the shortlist, and if we then evaluate from there, it would be helpful to know what the qualitative analysis is or subjective analysis. So that would be helpful for me, but I will support the motion. Just in the future, I'd like to have. We're getting more on these when we come down to not having to go with the strict tender process, but it would be helpful for me.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Appreciate those comments. Any other comments? Okay, I too will support the motion, and the main reason I'm supporting the motion is because I fully trust our co-chairs who have been involved in this process for a year, know far more about our needs and the kind of things that we're looking for in this report. And so, although Urban Matters is slightly higher than 4 others, not substantially, but slightly, I think if the quality is what we want and we get the information we want, it will be worth it. It's also within budget, so I will support the motion. Any other comments? All those in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, we're moving to tab 9, Introduction of Bylaws. City of Salmon Arm Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4346, Gagnon and Morgan. 2nd Avenue, 741 Northeast, R1 to R8, first and second reading. Councillor Flynn moves. Councillor Eliason second. I'll have the administrative officer read the motion, please.
Moved by Councillor Flynn, seconded by Councillor Eliason, that the bylaw entitled Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4346 be read a first and second time, and that final reading be withheld subject to approval by the Ministry of Highways.
Thank you. Director of Development Services.
Your Worship, the property under application is located just east of City Hall up 2nd Avenue Northeast, halfway up the block on the north side of the road. There's 3 relatively new infill lots subdivided within the last 5 years. This is a vacant property on the easternmost lot of what was once 1, and you can see that there's a long narrow house built on 751 2nd Avenue, and what's being proposed on 741 is a new home with a suite in the house. The OCP is high density residential in this area. It's presently zoned R1 single family, and R8 zoning would allow for a legal suite.
Great, thank you very much. Comments or questions from council? So this is to go to public hearing. All those in favor? Thank you. Passes unanimously. Move to tab 10, reconsideration of bylaws. We have 2 to reconsider. The first one is a bylaw entitled City of Salmon Arm Cemetery Management Amendment Bylaw, number 4340, to be read a final time. Do we have a mover? Councillor Lavery, thank you. Councillor Eliason, second. Director of Engineering and Public Works, did you speak to this, or? Not sure.
Your worship, I can speak to it.
Can you? Thank you very much.
Yes,
Chief
so
Financial Officer?
The bylaw presented for adoption today will set the cemetery rates for the remainder of 2019 and 2020. The fees are based on the recommendations received from a cemetery price benchmarking study that was completed in late 2018. The fee structure reflects an increase in existing rates by 40% in 2019 and 2020. New offerings such as family vessels and the scattering garden are priced at based on market trends and recommendations in the pricing study.
Thank you very much. Any questions from council? This is final reading. Any questions? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Item 10.2. City of Salmon Arm Municipal Ticket Information Amendment Bylaw, number 4342, street solicitation. It's final reading. Have a mover to this motion. Councillor Walsh-Richmond, Councillor Lavery, thank you. Director of Development Services.
Your Worship, this is a proposed amendment to the ticket information bylaw to include a fine for breach of the street solicitation bylaw with a fine of $50 for a number of infractions that are contained within the new bylaw that was adopted within the last 2 months.
Great, thank you. Comments from council? Councillor Walsh-Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'll use the opportunity to thank everyone who's reached out about this, pleased with or very disappointed with. Much attention from regional and even national media, and it did give us an opportunity to talk about the wider issue, the outreach worker, and the work that's being done by many committees and many nonprofits in town. I will vote to support it, and I am 100% confident that this fine will never be issued, and it's a piece of housekeeping, but also a tool that we have in the event of a very grave situation, and we can't leave the city in a position where it wouldn't be able to enforce its own bylaw.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, I was absent the last meeting when council passed first 3 readings, and appreciate them taking that on, and also speaking to the media, especially Councillor Walsh-Richmond. I know has been pretty involved, so really appreciate that part. Also feedback from the public, and there's been lots of feedback, some within the city and some from farther away. And some, I think, of the comments that were made were based just on a headline and without the background information, which I think we tried to provide when speaking to people. The solicitation bylaw itself is meant to be helpful, and it's only one small piece of ways that we're helping here. I think the recently announced housing announcement on 5th Avenue, where with BC Housing, with CMHA, with a private developer in the city of Salmon Arm, developing 103 housing units, 34 of which are supported housing units, is one piece, because we know that putting a roof over people who are homeless is the most important thing that we can do. So Councillor Walsh-Richmond talked about the outreach worker, and we are working hard to establish an outreach worker funded by the province. We plan on speaking to the minister at the UBCM. And we need to be able to go out and help those people who perhaps are not in a position to be able to come in and ask for help. And so that's certainly a second piece that we're working on. A third piece that we're working on is with the Salvation Army to try to get funding so that we can put a commercial kitchen there, and that service could be offered year-round. Presently, it's only offered from October to March because it doesn't have a kitchen in it, and it can only be offered in the evening. So there are a number of other pieces. I think there was intimation by some of the emails that I received that somehow councillors who were supporting this piece of the bylaw were not caring and compassionate about those in need of housing. And I'd go on record as saying that just simply is not true. The councillors who supported the bylaw certainly are caring and compassionate and doing everything we can to try to help those folks out. So I just wanted to say my piece because I was absent at the time, and I will support final reading. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Your Worship. And you've said most of what I was going to say. I just think the input has been good. It's kind of interesting that a lot of the input that came in didn't occur in the two public opportunities we had and through the whole time where we had opportunity for input before passing the bylaw. I do think it has been ignored by a lot of the criticism, all the work that has been done behind the scenes to try to solve the problem. And I think the other thing that's been ignored in a lot of the communication is the fact that without this ticketing for our RCMP, if they enforce the Safe Streets Act, it's a criminal offense. This is not. This is a municipal bylaw that has no criminal implications, and I think giving this to our RCMP is actually more compassionate than relying on the Safe Streets Act. So I appreciate the work that's been done by those with the media. I appreciate all the input, but I think there's some misunderstanding and lack of understanding on the work that's been done behind the scenes. So I will vote in support, and I think this is the next step in the bylaw being effective in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All those in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you. We will move to correspondence. Informational correspondence. I'll open up to councillors who wish to speak to items. Councillor Eliason.
Number 3, I would make a motion to direct staff to work with the Terry Fox Run Days to help that event happen.
The motion. Councillor Cannon. Any input from staff on that particular item? Okay, it's a standard one. I think we're used to doing that. Any comments from council? Councillor Wellsford, would you like to comment on that item? Okay, any comments on that item? I'll call the question in. All those in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you. Councillor Eliason?
Yeah, number 7, I'd make a motion to allow the Fall Fair to use our fields at least, and I guess seek permission from the school board for the actual Safeway field, but I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Seconder to that motion? Councillor Lavery? Any comments from staff on that one? Okay, thank you. Comments from council? All those in favor? Thank you.
And then lastly, I would ask that number 1, the letter about the intersection of 3rd and 5th, be sent to the Traffic Safety Committee and staff to review that to make sure that we address that.
Thank you. Seconder to that motion? Councillor Lavery? Discussion on that motion? I would just like to make a comment on the motion. First of all, I support it, and I think that's the right place for it to go. And I did meet with Mr. Dudo and a few people who live in the complex where he lives. I have to say that I was very impressed with the way the people who live there carried themselves. We know that there's development going on there, and they are really global thinkers and thinking ahead. Their concerns are outlined in the letter about the intersection of 3rd and 5th Avenue Southwest, and they're thinking there's going to be more traffic there, so that well may be a place that we need a 4-way intersection. So I would support that motion. Is there any other comments on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you.
And then lastly, just to be quick, I spoke with, number 4, I spoke with Rebecca about her letter. I followed up and I shared Councillor Wallace Richmond's conversations that she'd had with some radio things, and I assured her that was reflected in the mayor and Councillor Flynn's and everyone else's comments about the panhandling bylaw, that this is what Jim got on us, but this isn't all that we're doing, and it was more of a media story and we were trying to take a more holistic approach. So I did follow up with her.
Thank you for doing that. Appreciate it. Any other items, Councillor Eliason?
No, I'd like to knock them out quick and fast. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right. Councillor Wallace Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. Item 10.
Okay.
Your Worship, if council would agree, I see that Jenny Carter is with us here today and maybe wanted to.
Speak to the item?
Yes.
Yes, and we don't really need a motion from council if it's an item on here and Jenny's here and would like to say a few words. Please do come forward. If you don't mind just giving us your name and residential address.
My name is Jenny Carter. My address is 2706 Tranquil Place, Blind Bay, BC.
Great, welcome to council. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for inviting me to speak.
Okay.
So I'll just speak directly to what the request is. From the green space community, that's a legacy project over at the United Church, and that is to seeking to bring different people together for the good of Salmon Arm. It's non-denominational, it's not political. It's simply to help build community. And one of the things that we've been working a lot with the Syrian refugee population, we're working with the local Indigenous people as well as the LGBTQ community. And one of the things that we would like to do on the International Day of Peace from the United Nations is to hold a peace vigil at the Peace Park downtown. And it would be a short event, a 1-hour event at the max, where people would come together and do kind of a symbolic action of peaceful action, a demonstration that peace, diversity and peace are interwoven and are important. And the best things about Salmon Arm are the facts that we are a diverse community and seeking to find our way to live together. I don't know what else I can say to that, except who doesn't like peace? Anyway,
Well,
there we
thank
go.
you.
But I can answer questions.
No,
if you have any.
appreciate you coming forward. Are there any questions for Jenny? Okay, thank you so much for coming and
Thank you.
speaking to us. Councillor Wallace Richmond?
Do we, Your Worship, through staff, do we need a motion to
We would.
approve this? Yes, okay.
Would you like to make that motion?
I will make that motion.
Thanks. Councillor Flynn will second the motion. Can we just check with staff to see if there's any complications they want to share with us? Director of Engineering and
Not
Public
that
Works?
we're aware of, Your Worship. We'll definitely check the dates to make sure there's no conflict.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wallace Richmond, do you want to speak further to the motion?
No, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Flynn, did you want to speak to the motion? And then
Yeah,
Councillor-
I will vote in support of the motion. We've been very, very protective of Marine Peace Park, but a non-denominational, inclusive event celebrating peace kind of seems like it fits for that park. So I will vote in favor wholeheartedly and look forward to our community supporting the event like I know our community will.
Thank you. Councillor Cannon?
I totally support this as well, but just process, does this get booked through the Recreation Society, the park there?
I'll ask the Director of Engineering and Public Works.
Your Worship, yes, they would be booking the gazebo area for the, with the Rec Society. And then we would also follow up with a letter of approval from council.
Thank you.
So I
Councillor
can
Cannon,
bring,
do you want to follow up to that?
yeah, I can bring that up at my meeting tomorrow, the dates. Okay, thanks.
Super, thank you, Councillor Cannon, appreciate that. Any other comments? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Any other items people wish to discuss on this correspondence? Councillor Lavery.
Thanks, Your Worship. Item number 11.
Okay.
And Board of Examiners extends congratulations to Ms. Jackson, our corporate officer. And it does mention pursuit of studies, and I'm wondering, A1 suggests that we extend congratulations as well for accomplishments, and what is kind of clarification of what this means about pursuit of studies.
Director of Corporate Services.
Thank you, Councillor Lavery. This means that I will be pursuing the Board of Examiners certification, and that is just for local government staff members. And there are a number of requirements for education, and I meet almost all of them, but I am one course shy in this instance. So I applied and was the lucky recipient of a scholarship, so I can do that.
Perhaps, Your Worship, I can speak for this.
Yes, please do.
Congratulations from all of us, and your dedication to lifelong learning and improving professionally has been noted, so
Thank you, Councillor Lavery. Councillor Lavery, do you have any other items? No. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Oops, there you go.
As your representative at Community Futures, I want to just ask you all to quickly read the annual review, and it's there for your review. Interesting how they used, in their own way, our new branding, and just with their logo, Small Business, Big Ideas. So the branding is definitely taking foot in our community. I also wanted to talk about item 2.
Yes, please.
And item 2 is a letter that I think I would like to refer to our Director of Engineering and Public Works, preaching to the converted. I know our Director of Engineering and Public Works has been talking to us a fair bit about water conservation, and this is one of the last people I would think would be saying we should be charging for our water. So I think this could also be referred to the Environmental Advisory Committee as well. But interesting how sometimes over time people's ideas change. And I think this is a very reasonable approach being proposed, but I found it a very interesting letter.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. I'm curious, in the letter, it says that by now the vast majority of houses in Salmon Arm have water meters. I'd be interested, not necessarily today, but at some time in knowing what the percentage is.
Your Worship, we can get the percentage. Unfortunately, the older homes, before the bylaw was presented in the 90s, so anything probably pre-90s does not have necessarily a water meter, unless somebody has taken out a plumbing permit. As soon as a plumbing permit is taken out, then a water meter is required.
Right.
So we could definitely do a calculation. But any new homes, residential homes, any kind of suites, all require water meters. Okay. And all of our commercial, industrial, institutional buildings are metered.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes, Councillor Flynn,
Just
please
a
go
follow-up
ahead.
question to the mayors. The idea of saying everybody who has a water meter would be metered and there'd be a level you could use, but above that you'd get charged. Is that possible in water metering? And then secondly, is it possible to say these older homes still just pay a flat fee, or would we have to make sure everybody's metered? And I mean, I'm probably way ahead of the game, but I'm just wondering.
Your Worship, it's a very good concept and it can be done, but before you go to universal metering, you need to balance your revenues with your expenditures to make sure that you're actually bringing in enough revenue to maintain your utility. Because once people get charged for what they're using, a lot of people who are getting high bills will reduce, and therefore your revenues are going down. So it's very complicated for a community who has not been billed based on usage to enable that. So there's often cases where the City of Kamloops, I believe, actually sent out false bills for 1 year to give people an awareness of what they're going to be paying. And it was probably an eye-opener for some. So I think before we go to this sort of an approach, we need to look at that at a citywide, also about metering everybody at the same time. So it'll have to be a universal metering program.
Well, you at least have one taxpayer supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn, for bringing that up, and thank you to Mr. Shalm, and perhaps the Environmental Advisory Committee might invite him there. Any other comments on that item? Any other comments, Councillor Flynn?
No,
On any
I
other?
don't think so.
Okay. Seeing no other comments, I'll just comment on item number 5, the letter from Mr. Shobitar regarding latecomer charge agreements. And so thank you to our engineering department and to Jen there, and to our Chief Financial Officer as well, who've been liaison with me, and Jen's been in touch with Mr. Shobitar, and I also talked to Mr. Shobitar, who is very reasonable. It's quite a complex situation that we're talking about here, so but I think it's important that we do write back to Mr. Shobitar and let him know that we have received his letter, thanking him. His main message to me was, if there's any way that we can let residents know earlier that they may be accruing interest on latecomer fees, that would be helpful. And so I said, you know, he understands the complexity of that, but he also has paid in full interest and the latecomer agreement. His situation is very unique in that he lives at the bottom of Foothill Road, Foothill and 10th, and his house is actually hooked up to sanitary from the backside, but the sewer line goes along Foothill, and so he's part of the latecomer agreement, which he's okay with. And he wanted to pay it because he did not want it untitled, because he's thinking, he knows that his property is in the medium residential area and may want to develop in the future. So he thought, well, I'll just get it off title now, and at some time in the future he may look at developing down on that corner. So I appreciate staff's involvement there, and if we could just communicate with Mr. Shobitar, that would be terrific. Is there any other comments on that one, Councillor Flynn?
Is it accurate that we charge a daily interest rate of 2% compounded daily?
I'll let the Chief Financial Officer answer that question.
Your Worship, the interest rate is, we calculate it daily, but it's an annual rate. We do that because prime fluctuates. It's not compounded, it's simple interest. So there is no interest accruing on interest. The principal sum of the latecomer agreement is just that when we actually do the calculation, we do it daily, but it's prorated over the year. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's the least complicated of this.
I gather
this
it's a
is
very
provincial legislation as well that we are following.
But is the interest rate provincial legislation?
I'll ask the Chief Financial Officer to answer that.
The interest, sorry, I do have it here. We are required to levy interest calculated annually at a rate established by bylaw. And we do have a bylaw, a latecomer and interest establishment bylaw, and within that bylaw, the interest rate is prime plus 2%, calculated annually, commencing on the date of substantial completion.
That explains why my math doesn't work. Okay. It's prime plus 2, not 2%.
That's right.
Prime plus 2 is not unreasonable. So.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Any other questions or comments on any of the informational correspondence? Okay, seeing none, we'll flip over to the late item, which is item 11.2, regarding a request to hold the Josh Hunter Memorial Skateboard Competition at Blackbird Skateboard Park. Is there a mover who would like to move that? Councillor Cannon, second, Councillor Eliason. Is there any staff person who'd like to comment? I think Council has most of the information. Director of Engineering and Public Works, is there any difficulties around this request that you can see?
No, Your Worship, I believe that similar events have happened at this park, so it's just a matter of insurance and letting them know and coordinating that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cannon, as a mover, did you want to speak to it? Okay.
I think it would be a great event to support, and I think there's a bit of history with Josh Hunter and that park, so I think it's a good fit, and it'll be great to have it there.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right, seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Thank you to Trevor for the letter. So we're at presentation and delegations. We're ahead of time, so we're going to skip over those two, and at 4 o'clock we will do our first presentation, but we'll move to council statements, item number 14. And Councillor Cannon, you had a councillor statement that you wanted to start with.
Yes. At our last council meeting, we voted on a motion in regards to Interfor's, a letter supporting Interfor in the timber licenses. And I would like to make a motion to bring this back, because I would like to discuss it if I'm successful.
Okay, and Councillor Cannon, I just want to make sure that the motion is on your screen now, and I think the motion you're talking about is motion 0389, the top piece there.
Yes.
Okay, not the second piece.
Yeah, because the second piece does, I guess it all depends if I'm successful in this one, right? As to what we would discuss in that meeting, how it would go.
Understand. So for council's information, the process of bringing a motion back to council is anyone who's on the supportive side of a motion who wishes to bring a motion back to council is permitted to do so, as long as staff has not acted on that motion. And in this case, we have not. We've drafted a letter, but I met with Councillor Cannon, purposely did not sign and send the letter off, knowing that she was wanting to perhaps consider bringing the motion back. So we have not acted on it yet. The way the process works is a councillor can make the motion that Councillor Cannon has just made and ask for a seconder. If there is a seconder to the motion, then we vote on the motion to bring the motion back without discussion. If there's no seconder, then nothing happens. If in the vote to bring the motion back, if there is a seconder, if that passes, then we reintroduce the motion and discuss it. If it does not pass, then this motion stands and staff goes ahead and acts on that motion. So that's the process. So we'll start, Councillor Cannon has moved to bring the motion back. Is there a seconder to that motion? Councillor Wallace-Richmond would second the motion. So I will then call the question, and this question will determine whether we bring it back to the table. Needs a majority in order to pass. All those in favor of the motion? All opposed? So the Mayor and Councillor Flynn opposed, so we will bring it back. So Councillor Cannon, you may speak to the motion.
Okay. So I actually would like to put forward a different motion. Should I put that forward and then speak on why?
So what you can do, Councillor Cannon, is you can amend this motion, as long as it doesn't change the intent, or you can speak against the motion, we could vote, and if it fails, you could bring up your motion. So I'm not sure which you would like to do. Do you want to try to amend it?
Sure.
Okay.
So I would like to amend the motion that, now let me just read it here. Supporting the transfer of Canberra Interfor to provide. I would like to support Interfor in the Vavenby timber licenses, but a portion of the volume to support going to community forests and First Nations who also wish to manage these lands as well. So I want a portion of it. I don't want to support all of it going to Interfor. I want a portion to go to community forests and First Nations that are in those.
I think that's a reasonable amendment. So the motion would say, council send a letter to Minister Doug Donaldson supporting the transfer of the Canfor Beavenby timber license to Interfor with a portion of the volume to go to community forests and First Nations.
Yep.
Be accurate? Okay. So is there a seconder for the amendment? Councillor Lavery. So Councillor Cannon, do you wish to speak to the amendment?
Yep. I just, a lot of to understand how the timber licenses work, because it's ever changing in the Ministry of Forests, the way that they're doing things. And with that mill closing down, we had a presentation by Interfor, and we did ask them whether Gorman Brothers, which is a mill in our community, would be interested in these timber licenses. And I have talked to someone from Canoe Forest Products as well. And yes, they weren't interested in these timber licenses, but thinking of the area on the map and talking to other people in the forest industry, I just think for us to support all of the Beavenby timber license going to one producer, I feel is short-sighted of us, because there's a lot of communities that border that timber in that area that, you know, they're affected with the job losses and stuff like that. And there's community forests that are operating in that area, as well as First Nations that are also interested in that wood. I'm not saying don't let Interfor have some of that wood, because I think they probably, with their operation, will have the majority of the wood. But I think some of that wood should be allotted to the community forests in that area and the First Nations.
Okay, thank you. Speaking to the motion, to the amendment, Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I won't support the amendment. I understand the reason for the amendment, but I feel like our job at this table is to ensure that Gorman Brothers and Canoe Forest Products, who are local, as well as Adams Lake Operation, who provide local jobs, are my concern at this table. I'm not saying I don't care about those other communities, but the process that they have to follow beyond this is looked at by the provincial government very closely, and it's the provincial government's job to determine if they have other applicants, whether they're First Nations, other industry companies, or community forests. There's no question that those people have already expressed interest, because I've done a bunch of research since this motion came forward and had done some research before, and there's no question there's other people interested in this, and the provincial government knows that. But at this table, my job, and the only people that have come to us, are Adams Lake. They're asking for us to support the transfer of these licenses, and if they don't get the transfer of these licenses, there's significant concern about sustainability of jobs in our area. So personally, I don't want to do the province's job. I don't want to get into forestry management. I don't want to get into dealing with stumpage fees. And I support the original motion, so I won't support the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I too was away last week, so a number of us were away. I managed to look at the presentation on YouTube. And as a general comment, I think it's good, this is a good example, it's good practice on our part when we receive a recommendation for a motion from a presentation to actually receive the motion, but spend some time considering it. And I would put, and it's a motion that I would support, but the EAC made some recommendations as well as to what we do. So I just, in the back of my mind, this fits into that view that I've had of approaching things, of saying, basically, thanks for it, we will deal with it as soon as possible, but we always do better when we have some time to expand our thinking a little bit. I will, this is an interesting discussion for me, I will support the motion, but fully recognize that it's the province's responsibility to allocate this.
So when you say support the motion, we're talking about the amendment presently. Okay, thank you. Councillor Eliason.
Thanks. I think by us reshaping this and amending this motion, it shows that we're on top of this item, I know this is a heavy conversation that the ministry is going through right now. I know that the ministry is now, there's going to be a lot of fiber licenses that they're going to be dealing with. And I think by us saying that we really support our mills having enough fiber to go on, but it's showing our sensitivity to the other regions. And I can almost guarantee that the minister and the ADM and the DM have all thought about this. They're thinking about how to allocate these fiber rights. And so it's a very important discussion, but I think showing that sensitivity within our letter while still advocating for our local employers is very important, and I'm certain the ministry's already thought of it, but adding it to the letter will not hurt or wreck the chances of the local companies, in my opinion. So I'll support the amendment.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lassen. Councillor Wallace Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. I too will support the new motion, or the amended motion, and I do so because while I recognize that it is a compromise and it feels like a step back, ultimately it's more inclusive and make sure that we cover all our bases, because there are other people deeply impacted by the decisions that are coming, and I would certainly be very regretful if a motion such as this were to cut people out of a process that they too hadn't had an opportunity to present to. So I'll be voting for the motion.
For the amendment.
For the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace Richmond. Any other discussion on the amendment? So I will speak to the amendment as well, and thank you, Councillor Cannon. I think it's been a good discussion that we've had, and it's caused us all to learn a bit more about timber licenses and forestry practices. So what I've learned in my discussions are, and I don't think this is new for council, is that within the province, in order to sustain the product over the next 100 years, the allowable cut in the province has to be diminished. And I've heard the figures, but it's diminished by a substantial amount. And so, of course, that is causing difficulties because mills who need the timber aren't able to operate as well on the limited timber supply. And there's a number of reasons why that timber supply is limited. We know them: wildfire, bug kill. Mills are so much more efficient now and need more fiber. So all of those go into the package. My worry about the amendment, and I understand the feeling of others, my worry about the amendment is that the province is receiving input from all over about what it is different areas want. And I agree with Councillor Flynn that I think our job here, as the job of the people in Vavenby or the people in Clearwater or the people in Kamloops and Chase, is to ensure that Adams Lake has enough timber in order to be sustainable over the next 25 years. My worry is if they do not get a substantial amount of this timber, is that will not be the case. And if that happens, the economy in our area will be negatively impacted. It's kind of like a pizza when you're hungry. If you cut it into too many pieces, no one gets full. And I see this kind of in the same way. I think what will happen is that the Minister of Forest is going to receive input from places like us, all over the province, and is going to have to make some type of decision regarding percentages of where this will go, hoping that the percentage they give is going to fulfill everybody's need. My feeling is we need to give a strong message that Adams Lake needs this timber in order to be sustainable over time. And so that's why I can't support the amendment. But I think the conversation is great and appreciate everyone's professionalism and knowledge on it. Councillor Flynn.
I just had a question for staff, or not a question. Could staff read the amendment, please?
It was moved by Councillor Cannon, seconded by Councillor Lavery, and the amendment is to allocate a portion of the timber to Canfor and First Nations.
Yeah.
And community forests. community forests and First Nations.
So do we know specifically which community forests are interested? Do we know specifically which First Nations? Do we know any of that? Because, I mean, I will implore council to really be careful that we're not doing the Ministry of Forest job, and there's a detailed process for this. And we haven't had, and I mean, I agree with the comments from Councillor Lavery that we shouldn't perhaps have dealt with this right away. There was a time frame. We were shorthanded. In hindsight, I support having this discussion again. But to me, we're going beyond what our job is, and I don't even know who else is interested. And I am concerned about Adams Lake's long-term viability, and I've had further discussions with them. I've had further discussions with 3 forest industry consultants and with Gormans/Canoe. And I really think that at this table, our concern should be sustainability of jobs. We should support Adams Lake, and we should let the province deal with the other demands, because they know who they're from, and we don't. So there's a process in place. It's quite clear, and I think I understand the sentiment, and I do think it will get attributed less than 100% to Adams Lake, but I don't know that that's our job at this table.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Cannon.
I just, in regards to how the amendment reads, Chief Administrative Officer, could you just reread it? Because I just wanted to make sure that it has in there that we support Interfor obtaining a portion of the volume of the timber licenses. Like,
So the way I
wanna make
understand the
sure that's in
motion
there.
is, and I'm glad that we're clarifying, I think it reads, council send a letter to Mr. Doug Donaldson supporting the transfer of the Canfor Vavenbury timber license to Interfor with a portion of the volume going to community forests and First Nations.
Or, no, it should say, a portion of the volume of the Canfor Vavenbury timber licenses going to Interfor, as well as community forests and First Nations. So I think that's, just as long as it's in there that the amendment supports Interfor getting some of it, as well as an allotment going to community forests and First Nations. And if I could just speak again on it.
Absolutely.
I as well, after the meeting, have talked to several forest consultants. And I talked to someone at Gorman Brothers as well. And what I was hearing out there with the Ministry of Forests, how everything is so volatile and the way things are changing, that really is it up to a community or a town to support totally one company to get all of the timber licenses when you look at where it's located on the map. So that's what I was hearing with my talking to quite a few people in this industry. So I hope that we get the support and that this letter for the amendment will be the way we have it written here, and it will be supported.
Thank you, Councillor Cannon. I'll let that be the close of the discussion. I'll just have the administrator read the motion now with the amendment to make sure that everybody's comfortable on what they're voting on.
Well, the amendment hasn't
Hasn't passed yet.
That's right.
Okay, do you want to read the amendment?
It was moved by Councillor Cannon, seconded by Councillor Lavery, that a portion of the timber rights in question be made available to Interfor, community forests, and First Nations.
Okay, and you'll build that into the letter.
Yes.
Councillor Cannon, is that reflective of your thoughts? Okay, and seconder, that's reflective of your thoughts? Okay, I think we've had a good chance to discuss then. I will call the question on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? All those opposed? Councillor Flynn and Mayor are opposed. So I'll now call the question on the motion as amended. All those in favor? All those opposed? Councillor Flynn and myself opposed. So the motion passes as amended, and we will reflect that in our letter. Okay? Thank you very much. It's 3:40. Can we go to number 17? Councillor Lavery, are you comfortable with us jumping down to unfinished business and deferred table items? Okay, super. Just give you a minute to get it, and staff to get that together. So item 17.1, which was a deferred motion, and will now come to the table. Thank you. And Councillor Lavery moved this, so we need a seconder for this motion to bring it onto the table. Is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Wallace-Richmond seconds. Councillor Lavery.
Thanks, Mayor Harrison, and thanks for the seconding of it, whether that just be for discussion or proceeding. I'll speak to the motion itself in a minute. I'll speak to it directly, but I want to give a brief context as to why I'm bringing this forward. I am not against, and I fully support a transportation tax, parcel tax. We need it. It's dependable, it's annual, and it's for critical road infrastructure. So that part is not in question in my mind. And I also recognize it's difficult to identify a metric that can reflect actual use. So I get that part as well. I get the positive aspects of it. But for me, the overriding problem is this is a regressive tax. And regressive taxes, in theory, are approaches that I disagree with. I don't want to be overly dramatic about it, but a little retired couple driving to church and shopping and medical appointments pays as much as I do with a number of vehicles based on our family. And certainly they pay as much as a large mall with a parking lot full of cars. So I get the reason and fully support the reason why we have a parcel tax, a transportation parcel tax. It's how we go about it. And the reality is, for me, in the last 4.5 years, there's never been a chance to actually talk about it, to review what we're doing. So the notice of motion in front of us here now, the purpose of that is that we, if successful, formally review the policy prior to the upcoming budget by asking staff to report back on funding options. There are strengths and downsides to all of the options, and we have had snippets of that in reporting to council, but it's always before or on the day of a budget amendment, and we have not had that full discussion. That we ask staff to report back on those options, that council review them, review that report, we share them with the public, and we have a public input session on it. And do what we do well, I would suggest. We have diverse discussion and decide to either continue with what we are currently doing or adopt another approach. So what I'm proposing in here is to take the steps for reviewing this policy.
Thank you, Councillor Lavery. Do others wish to speak to this motion? Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Worship, and I struggle with asking staff to do another report on a transportation parcel tax, and I've been here to see the original reports, the comparisons to ad valorem, the discussion all around it, and to have a public input session. I'm pretty sure that most of the people that show up will be people opposed for the reasons stated, and I just am not sure this is the best use of our staff time. And I don't know if there's significant information from the previous rounds of discussion around this and when we've talked about increasing it. The reality is we need the funds, whether it's an ad valorem or a transportation parcel tax. I'm suggesting that I think we're near the limit of what we can charge for the transportation parcel tax, and maybe there could be 2 tiers to that transportation parcel tax, but knowing how busy staff is, I'm not sure there's going to be a good time to do this, but I don't want to entertain changes for the next budget. That's just me personally, so I'm not sure I can support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Eliason?
Yeah, thanks. This is a tricky one because I look at cities like Vancouver and Calgary really struggling with how they charge their commercial and industrial taxes and what those amounts are and how to get their residential to those other different levels, how to get those multipliers in line. And this has always been our flattening out, so to speak, of that taxation. In an attraction retention sort of way for businesses and economic development, often those taxes go into the commercial tax base or the industrial tax base or the industry tax base so that we can do just as Councillor Lavery has suggested, which is to keep taxes low. But these are taxes nonetheless. And so who pays the fair share and who pays what and how we allocate that? I think that's the beauty of this flat tax across the board, is that it's status quo for everyone and everyone who uses the roads. It's 1.3, $1.5 million now, 1.3. And so that's a huge, what is that, just about a 9% tax increase if we threw it onto the regular, if it's a 0% tax increase, but people would see their property tax bill going up by 10% next year, almost, if you add in the other things. And they wouldn't notice that the parcel tax is gone. So there'd be a huge piece of sticker shock, and some people would be allocated unfairly or misproportionately. So I would look at alternative ways to fund a transportation parcel tax, but I do not support changing it into an ad valorem tax based on your property value or your property class, because this flat tax to me works. Everybody uses roads, everybody benefits from roads, and I would disagree with Councillor Flynn on the fact that this parcel tax never needs to be reviewed again, because I think it's appropriate that we review it or hook it up to something like a CPI indexing thing that increases it and takes that out of our hands, so that we increase this fund every year by a little bit marginal, proportionately to what is required, because I know we're on the low end for asphaltic overlays. So at this time, I wouldn't support taking staff time to review this, knowing how our multipliers work and how we place in the province. So thank you for the consideration, and it's got us all thinking, but I can't vote to do this.
Thank you. Other discussion on the motion? Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. My concern is that we're dealing with the symptom, not the problem. So if Councillor Lavery's concern is that we don't have enough money for road asphaltic overlays, that's a tough one to say, and that staff is telling us that we've underinvested in the infrastructure, I think there is a pain point here and a knot to be undone. I don't want to be the one responsible for coming up with policy or taxation options that we would have as a community to make this work better, but I also don't want to be the one to say, well, I don't think we can do anything different, so we're not going to do anything at all. I do want to explore how this could work. We also have frontage taxes. We have other kinds of tools in our toolkit, and I would be interested in exploring it with staff's guidance and more council education, and so I'm happy to support it. Although if it doesn't move ahead, I think it's important to remember that all taxes ultimately has a piece of, is unfair on some level, but we do as a community share the use of our roads, and we have to find the most fair way for everyone to pay their fair share.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace-Richmond. Any other councillors wish to speak? Okay, just from my point of view, Councillor Lavery, would you be interested in amending the last line to 2021 instead of 2020? Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship, and I'd actually thought about that, and I would say early in the 2021 year. In some ways, and I'm very conscious here right now with our upcoming budget discussions that are actually going to be accelerated a little bit, maybe even a little earlier. It still is a very narrow timeline right now. And when I was thinking of this in June, I made the notice of motion in June. I was away 2 weeks ago, and the next thing we know, it's almost September and budget time. So I'm conscious that this would be a tight timeline. I'd be amenable to doing that with the understanding that it's done well early in the year. And I just emphasize that for me, this is not about raising the taxation or not. I fully agree that we need to be funding and our transportation infrastructure. It's how we do it, what metric we use, and any discussion of policy difference, some will shift back and forth. I just think it's a valuable discussion. And to answer your question directly, 2021, I'd be comfortable with a friendly amendment on that.
Okay, would the seconder accept that as a friendly amendment? Okay, so read 2021. Councillor Flynn, I'll speak to it after everyone's had their turn. Councillor Flynn?
I could support it with less pressure on staff and not as close to our budget process to do the review. I do think it talks about a public input session and which would be part education and getting input, but I think all of us at this table have to look at all the discussion previously about this. So I don't want it to sound like I don't want to review it, but I just think the timing right now is not good and would prefer that it be 2021 or 2022, but.
Okay, so it reads 2021 now. My comments are, I'm always interested in learning more information. So, and I think I can learn more about taxation. What I know about it now is I probably wouldn't support going from transportation tax to ad valorem. Just based on discussions we've had in the past, and actually the increase to the transportation tax this last go around and the implications that would have had for ad valorem. Having said that, I'm interested in learning. And so if it's 2021, I could support the motion, which is really to review the transportation parcel tax. But as I say, it's unlikely that I would support a move away from there, but I'd like to know more. Last opportunity for any councillor? Councillor Eliason?
Yeah, thanks. And I look at us, I'm always interested in different ideas on how we could replace a tax with another tax. I think that the HST was a good tax for us, and I thought that would have been a good thing for our province. But, you know, people speak and they maybe don't. So I'm open to new ideas. I do want to, there's no way that I could support this without the friendly amendment, which was to 2021. And knowing that our chief financial officer is going to be leaving in November for probably a year, because she doesn't want to do this that badly, probably the real reason, I still will not vote to support it. But if it passes, I'll read the report, but more for information.
Okay. Just before we vote, I'll ask if there's any comment from staff on the motion. Okay, so the friendly amendment is 2021 in the bottom line. Councillor Lavery, I'll give you a last opportunity. Do you want to say anything else? You're the mover, okay? All those in favor of the motion? Opposed? Councillor Eliason is opposed. Thank you. Okay, we will take a 5-minute break, and then we will have our first presentation, followed by our second presentation. We do. So welcome back. And Carson, nice to see you. And if your daughter would like to come up with you, please do. Come on up to the microphone. So, Mr. Carter, welcome to council. We
Thank
set
you.
aside 10 minutes for your presentation and then
I hear you have a gong that.
5
will
minutes
remind
for,
me.
yeah, you've heard, hey?
Yeah, I've heard about it.
5 minutes for questions and then we probably won't make
Hope
any
it's an A
motions today,
minor.
but we'll take into consideration what you have to say.
Thank you so much. for your
Thank you
time.
so much for coming and speaking to us.
So can I commence?
Please do.
Yes. Your worship, honorable council members, thank you for allowing me a portion of your time today. I know your day's coming to an end, so we will be relatively swift on our conversation. Also, congratulations on your election results. I also like to acknowledge Mr. Bannister for all his assistance he's given our family over the last 2 or 3 years. The topic of discussion today is dear to our family, 4 generations. It's also put us on a roller coaster of uncertainty and apprehension. The topic of discussion deals with the 28 lots near Canoe Beach, public beach, that are leased from the city of Salmon Arm. In 2016, the council, using their wisdom, decided in 2021 no new leases would be granted to the tenants, approximately 23 now, on said beach. This was very devastating for us at the time. It not only affects us, it affects over 70 people, different families who have been good tenants. There has been 3 that have not, and consequently we're here today. We feel in many ways that the error of so few should not put the majority of the people in an awkward position and receive the same punishment that has been rendered. My name is Carson Carter. I presently live in Calgary, Alberta. This is my daughter, Kendall Pritchard. I moved to Calgary 10 years ago. I'd retired in Salmon Arm in 1993. Just for a bit of history, the Carter family moved to Salmon Arm in 1945. My parents resided in Salmon Arm until their deaths. My father was a businessman here, and he served the community. My in-laws, Jack and Bar Dowlings, moved to Salmon Arm in 1959. He worked for C.D. Monroe. They got the first cabin at said beach in 1961. We still have that cabin today. In 1986, as our family grew, I purchased cabin number 12 from a veteran named Harold Damgard, who was a businessman in this community. The council, because of their decision, what we were asking that we have reconsideration, and would council re-evaluate the decision, the past decision in the year 2016. We have been good tenants. The majority of people have been good tenants. Less than 4 people or tenants caused the city of Salmon Arm a lot of financial grief. They also caused a lot of mental strain and anxiety on the staff of this office, which I'm going to apologize on their behalf. We would like to have some kind of reconsideration, and maybe we could come to some kind of compromise. As you know, the leases generate over $100,000 a year for the city of Salmon Arm. This is money, if the agreement does not go forward, that you will no longer receive, obviously. In the past, because of the error of 3 people or so, the removal of the cabins costs a minimum of $25,000. One of the conditions of leaving that property is we must remove our cabins within 30 days at our expense. Now, my concern is, from past experience, with 22 or 23 people there could conceivably 18 that will walk away from their cabins, which could cost the city over $500,000 if they so desire to remove the property. This is not something I'm making a threat about. It's just a conceivable situation that may occur. This is all I have to say. I'm going to be brief before the gong. And do you have anything to add at all?
I think he's covered most things. If you have any questions for us, feel free to ask.
Come forward, Ms. Pritchard. If you'd like to add at all, please do.
No,
You've got lots of time. I didn't mean to rush you in any way.
No, I think he's covered most things. I think what maybe a lot of people might think is that it's a lot of out-of-town people that are coming in and staying in those cabins, but most of us are Salmon Arm people.
Okay? Thank you very much. Carson, is there anything else you wish to add at this time before I ask for questions from council?
Do you have any questions at all?
Yeah, let's see. Councillors, do you have any questions for Mr. Carter? Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and thanks for the presentation. I'm going to be tough here.
Go for it.
You signed a lease that said final.
Yeah.
So what does the word final mean to you?
Well, it means what it means. It means that, from what he was speaking, that we have to walk away.
We'll walk away and that'll be the end of it. We'll shelve the topic to the back of our shelf. That'll be the end of it for our family.
Yeah.
And I understand, and personally I have sympathy with the generational aspect of the cabin and stuff like that. In your letter and in your presentation, you implied that the position of the city was because of troubles with the fuel.
Yeah, that's kind of what we had been told from a few and we've seen it. We've been there for, well, since the 60s. And the original people that were down there were never an issue. And we've seen it more so towards the public beach end of it with tenants that way, that we have tried to control in our power that we could do, but you know, you can't control that. So
we have a lot of new faces over that period
Yeah.
of time, and most of them do not have the attachment to the
Right.
property that we have.
or local. We are local people.
Yeah, we can serve our, we've been going to the beach now for over 69 years.
Yeah.
We were born and raised here in this, or we were from this town. We went to school in this town. My daughter wasn't, but my family
Right.
was. So we do have a vested interest, and we take pride in where we're at. We've never had a problem with the city of Salmon.
Never.
No,
But you get a lot of new faces, and they can cause some grief, which they did. It's, the city knows, and it's unforgivable what they did.
And I can appreciate
and the
that.
cost
and-
to the city of Salmon.
I can appreciate that. Can you appreciate that there is an aspect of this of public land as a public amenity?
Yeah.
And it should be available to the,
I guess my
greater public-
question what our questions were over that is basically what they'd be using that land for. Because we've been there, as you know, since the 60s, and if you're thinking of like sort of the public beach, that is never full. That is never full on the hottest summer day. That public beach is never used to a degree. But I mean, that's just we understand that, and we've read everything. Obviously, we've done our research and what the decision was made for. But I think the other thing is too is if you would look at it again, getting some input from people that are out there, we might have a bit of a different kind of point of view.
thank you for
We
that.
don't know what the city is planning for the
No.
property. We've not been privy to that, and I don't know. I was informed by a good source that they're not going to do anything right now or for the foreseeable future, that they're not going to lease it again. They certainly are not going to turn it into a public campground again. I don't think they want to cross that bridge. But
That's not for us to
anyway,
say.
we only can rely on your wisdom, and we'll have to go from there and accept what you decide. Thank you.
Yeah, and I know these are, I appreciate your answers to these questions. You also signed a lease agreeing to remove the cabin at your expense. So can you explain a little bit about the suggestion that cost of cabin removal deferring to the city?
Well, that's within our, we have a good lease with the city, and we know what the conditions are. But I know in the past, 3 or 4 cabins
Just walked away.
the city has incurred the expense over $100,000.
Yes. Is it your request that the city take on the request of cabin removals in the lease?
Basically, he's wanting to know, would you want the city to?
Is that what you're
remove
proposing?
that? No, we're just saying that I think that might be a risk going forward, just based on what's been happening out there. That's what we're saying.
Thank you.
Just knowing some of the people out there.
But also on the removal, we might, if it comes to that, there has to be some compromise with the city and ourselves. 30 days to remove a building like your house is rather awkward at times.
But you did sign the lease.
Yeah, we did. But what we're saying is, if you look at the history, you'll see what happened.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lavery. Councillor Wallace Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. I want to thank you for coming to speak to us. I have great empathy for your time as a family in a special place, and I think you were very fortunate. And I feel the gratitude. It's also important for me that I think we're making some assumptions here that might not be the case.
Right.
You are not being punished for the behaviors of other people in my view. In the 60s, Salmon Arm was a community of 2,500 people with beachfront galore. This to me is about scarcity and exclusivity. There's only so much beachfront, and there are more and more people living here and visiting here. And we do, as a public, share some beautiful space, Canoe Beach being one of them. And there's an inherent imbalance in 28 people having access to half the beach. And in terms of what to do with it, it's not an amusement park, it's a place of nature. And if we were to go back to the 60s and the existing rules that exist today in terms of riparian area and protection of habitat, none of those cabins could be there. So I guess there's two ways to look at things. In retrospect, with gratitude and being thankful for the opportunity you got, I'm sure it's been great for your family, but I would hate for you to leave this conversation feeling like you were being punished for something that someone else did, and the price you pay is the loss of time you get to spend with your family. I really don't see it that way. And it is a tough decision to make and a tough thing to go through. So I just felt better sharing that with you face to face.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh-Richmond. Councillor Cannon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that it's always been out there that the leases were going to expire in time. And then with the last lease that was signed, the end is coming for the leases. And I think an important thing is what Councillor Laverly brought up, is that the lease says that the cabin owners have to remove. But what does the city have to fall back on that the cabin owners are actually going to remove? Because you know as well as we do that the ones that have been taken off, the city had the cost of the removal. So in that lease agreement that we have right now that's coming to an end, the city has no recourse to get the money or get the cabin owners that have the lease to remove that. It just doesn't happen. And I mean, you alluded to, you know, if it's coming to an end, and what if we all have to leave? It's going to cost, it's going to have an amount to the city, because likely most of the cabin owners probably aren't going to remove their cabins. So that's an expense that we know is coming, whether it's coming at the end of this lease that we say is coming to the end of what was passed. And even if we were to extend it another 5 years or 10 years or whatever, we still have that same concern that that's being held over our head. So.
Well, not by us, hopefully.
Well,
we're just saying based on what we've seen down there.
But it was alluded to in your presentation,
We said we weren't threatening that. What we're saying is I could see it happening with other people, because we've always gone with the lease and all the bylaws. We paid our payments, we've done the taxes, we've done everything.
And if all of our leasees were that way, that would be great, but it's not a perfect world.
Not the perfect world.
And I think that you guys in your presentation touched on how much extra time it causes our staff dealing with that.
We know.
Trying to get people to pay their fees, and then ultimately when it's finished, trying to get the property cleaned up, right?
Yeah.
So I think a good point has been made that it is the public's land.
It is.
And it needs to be moved back in that direction.
I guess the question we have is that we were never really, I don't think we were ever really brought into the conversation to start with. And I think that's one of the big issues, considering we have been down there and we do know what it's like down there. It's one thing to say, oh, that land is going to be used by X, Y, and Z. I don't know how you're going to be policing that area and who's going to be using it, just from what I can see. But that's just from what I've seen over 40 years, 50 years.
We've come to this, the head in this respect, that when the resolution or motion was passed in 2016, We were never conferred, we were never brought into the conversation. We found out about the lease cancellation through the newspaper, and I don't think that's very professional in many ways, that we should have been consulted, that was forthcoming or so. So a lot of people were very upset because of the way the message was delivered.
Okay.
And I can understand why it was, because of the history of a few people.
Yeah, it's just good faith. Good faith.
Thank you, Councillor Cannon. Councillor Flynn, we have about, we'll go for 2 or 3 more minutes. Councillor Flynn, you have another turn.
Well, I
yet.
was actually going to ask a process question, because I would like to discuss this in more detail. And I don't think 2 or 3 minutes does it justice.
Yeah.
And we do have a second group presenting, so I would ask that we ask you guys to stick around till the next group presents if possible. And we do have a staff report on this with a lot of detail that I would like to discuss. And, well, Councillor Liveston, I'm asking for them to stick
You can
around.
speak to the chair, please.
Yeah, well, I just get tired of being told to hurry up when this is the first time we've discussed this in public. It's been in camera up until now, and this is not something we should rush. So I would like to ask these people to stick around if they're willing for us to discuss the memo, because our next presenters are coming on at 4:15.
Right.
The other option is too, if you don't have the time now, we are always available during the rest of the summer as well. Whatever's best for you.
Okay. Councillor Flynn, did you want to comment further? And
Well, if we're, I guess the other people
you haven't
waiting-
had your turn yet, so I want to make sure you get your turn.
Well, I've already mentioned something. This has been discussed in camera in detail due to legal implications and everything else. This is the first discussion in public. And I do want to state that the decisions that have been made up till now, and others have said this, have nothing to do with 3 or 4 bad apples. They have to do with what's in the best public interest.
I understand. Yeah.
Now, that being said, I voted in favor of terminating the leases when we had it here before.
Right.
I'm not sure I'm in favor now, because I think we will look really silly and fiscally irresponsible if we remove everybody from those leases in 2021 and we don't do anything with the property because we don't have any money to move forward. Long term, I think these should return to public access. It's always been a discussion around the timing of that. And it's interesting, you guys are being penalized or stated that you said, that you threatened that we may not remove the lots. The staff report says specifically all of the money in reserves could be spent removing properties. So staff acknowledges that people could walk away from that. So I didn't take that as a threat from you at all.
No, and we're not.
I took that as reality. I personally do not want to remove all of these lots if we don't have money to move the plan forward. I don't think we need the beach yet. But part of the reason this is happening without perhaps extending it, and I could lose that 5 or 6 to 1 in the future, is because of some of the bad apples. The fact is, moving it back to public use is not because of the bad apples. It's the right plan long-term for Salmon Arm.
No argument there, yeah.
I'm just not sure it's the plan that's right now, because we don't have money to turn that into park. It's not needed for park yet. And I want to have more discussion around that in the public forum.
Right.
So Councillor Flynn,
yeah.
how does this sound to you? Because I also wanted to make a brief comment, is I would suggest we place it on the next council meeting. And because we have the report here as information. We didn't get a chance to discuss it. We've received some input from Carson and from Kendall. So if we put it on the next council meeting, we could have this discussion and councillors could do their research prior to that.
Yeah, and all I would ask you people to do is, there is a Canoe Beach Park master plan that
Yeah,
took
so yeah, we're aware of it.
significant input from the community.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure all of you guys could have attended that. So there is a plan that's been developed by the community. I just question the timing of it, and that's the discussion we can have. But you should research that plan.
We have researched quite a bit, yeah.
Okay.
Our, one of our family members works for this, the public health department, and he's quite knowledgeable of all that.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Lassen.
Yeah, I get really scared when we talk about legal issues and land issues and leases and in a public forum, and I wanted to make sure that we're doing it right. So I will reserve my comments until next week.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to thank you for coming. Because I think it is important to have you give the opportunity and for us to hear, your circumstances, and I appreciate that. And we have a report from council that's in our agenda here. So we wanted to hear from you first before we discussed it. So we'll put it on our next agenda. I certainly don't come across with any promise of change, but I do promise that I will listen and consider, and I know that the other councillors will as well. So thank you very much for coming and speaking to us.
Thank you for your time. Have a good day.
Okay, we'll go to our second delegation. Dale Unruh and Brooks Christensen from Salmon Arm Silverbacks. Welcome, gentlemen. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, councillors. Sarah. Sure. So I know we talked about a few things back at a coffee with council, and this is kind of, I guess, the next step of wanting to come back to it. Myself and Dale, we both met with the Rec Society, and I know, Debbie, that you were part of that conversation of looking to form a partnership, a connection with the community and with the city to support the Silverbacks on a annually basis. And so with that, we've done some more research of, what do the Silverbacks do for the community? What do they bring? How do they help out other businesses in town? And basically looking to do the research for this meeting. And I know Dale had a couple comments back when we met for a brief moment there about, what his partners have done so far and their story bringing in the past 5 years. And maybe Dale, if you want to just touch on it, and then we can kind of talk a little bit more about the analysis. Thanks, yeah, so let me start by saying we're all very privileged to be living and taking part in Salmon Arm. It's a great community. It's one of a kind. So I got involved with the Silverbacks. I guess this is going to be the 6th season coming, and it's been a real cash cow. So we've had to eject a lot of funds into the team. It's about, our books are always open. We deal with the rec board. And that's not their policy, that's our policy to them. Being a good, is really, when it comes down to it, it is a private entity, but really, if we could get tax receipts, but we can't, because it's basically a donation every year. So we're writing about $300,000 to $350,000 a year worth of checks, just to keep it going. So, and that sounds crazy, but we are crazy hockey guys. So it makes a bit of sense to me. So why Salmon Arm? So I'd never been to Salmon Arm before 2013. So coming here, all the boxes checked off, and I want to be quick because I know everybody's short with time here tonight probably. I don't want to go into too much detail, but again, fell in love with the community and said, you know what, we got the right rink, we've got the right size of community, we're in the right division for competitiveness, we've got the right billets, we had the right community support. There had been a couple hiccups, so to speak, from the owners in the past. So I actually, to be quite honest, I underestimated that a little bit. There's been a lot of goodwill building from our group with the community at large and with all of you. So there's been lots of learning lessons and things like that. But the bottom line is, if one of us get hit by a bus, or if we decide one day not to own the team, I want to build something that the legacy is, it's concrete. It's something that we can all, in the future say that we've been part of, and we're not looking to ever make money at this. We're not. We want to, personally, I guess, with my partners and with Brooksy and all of us, I think, that are involved with the Silverbacks, we want to win, and we want to bring this to the community, and we want to have something special here, not just for
1 or 2 or 3 years until the next guy with a checkbook comes. We want to have this legitimate where, we all have participate in it. So I'm trying to think personally, because guys do get tired of writing checks, no matter what, or how successful they are or whatever. It just becomes something that's hard every time Brooks and I go to these guys and say, we need another check, even though they are great guys. And I guess I'm the managing director, so I'm speaking on behalf of the 5 of us. So there's 5 of us total. So we brought a lot of goodwill to the rink through donations, through our partnership group. I saw a lack of continuity between the Silverbacks and minor hockey, so we hired a gentleman who most of you know, Scotty Atkinson. So we brought Scotty to the community. His dad actually retired here. He had a connection with the community, so he was working at the Edge School. I chair the board of the Edge School, so I got in a little bit of trouble for a couple board meetings because I want to do the best for the community. So we took this gentleman, and he is the best. If anybody knows Scotty, he's changed. They made up awards this year that they didn't have and gave them to him. He's that good. So he's affected a lot of youth. So I see this thing right from the youth, right to our young youth, so to speak, and then right to, everyone at large in the community, that we can all benefit from this. So we're not asking for any cash. We're not asking for like, we all know what we're into and we support the team. We're going to continue to do that for a long time. But what we're requesting is, in lieu, ice time and some of the lease. And we've talked, again, Brooksy has mentioned, we've talked to our bosses, basically the rec society board, and the rec society board has again brought us back to, so we kind of did a little bit of back and forth, which that happens, and it's pretty much the way that it goes. So we've brought this to them, and they've recommended coming and again talking to council. So we've asked for, in lieu, for ice time and a break on the lease for $100,000 a year for 5 years. So to be quite honest with you, I'd never, in doing this, it's not the RBC Cup now, in doing this bid with the Centennial Cup, we all came to realize through economic development, through Lana, I think, right? Great young lady. She did a lot of work on this to get a multiplier and a calculation of what our team brings to the community, so that it's not just hey, we need a break and we don't bring anything, which I had never thought of doing, to be honest. We all talked about it, but we've never done it. So in doing so, we're at about 1.467 and some change million a year, which that probably makes some sense to me. It's probably, it could go 10-15% maybe either way, depending on the year, but it's a significant number. And so then I started learning about some other things that the council support that bring that generate those kind of dollars. So I didn't, that $100,000, to be honest, was kind of like, if we had $100,000, we could make this work for a long, long time and keep all these things going that we support in the community. So it hasn't been anything, there's not a forensic science to that number. It's just $100,000. But so happens, when I look at some of the other things that council support and that Salmon Arm at large support, the ratio is about right for what we bring to the table as far as economic development and sustainability. So that's what our ask is just on the lease basis. We're not asking for any cash. And then we would, in turn, we would want to sign a 5-year lease. And we would all want to commit to owning the team for that term as well, so that and then if it was longer, we could do longer. Like, that's all negotiable. But yeah, I guess, to end, and obviously you'll have some questions which Brooks and I can answer as best we can. you know, my biggest concern is not, I just don't want to fly in here and fly out of here. I've got a home here. I'm planning on being here for a long time. I want to make sure this thing's sustainable. And again, if this doesn't happen, we'll just make it happen anyway, because that's the way we are. You just got to do the right thing sometimes, no matter what. But it would sure help if we had this help, because I can sell that to my partners and say, hey, listen, they understand we're all in this together. We're all doing well together because of, you know, the spend that we've shown here now through economic development's calculation spreadsheet, and that's about all I have, Your Worship.
Thank you. Thanks, Dale. Brooks, did you want to add anything more before I open it up to questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing to touch on with what Dale said is that's $1.4 million that's brought in on a non-shoulder. That's a winter season in Salmon Arm. I don't know of any other groups that bring that kind of money into Salmon Arm in the winter months. Like I know Dale has kind of touched on Roots and Blues is a prime time in the summer that brings in I'm sure well over $1 million, but that's in prime time when the 30-degree weather. So I think that's something that we really hope that considers that's a quiet time in Salmon Arm when it's dark and snowy, that we are still bringing that money into the town here as well.
Great, thank you very much. Council, do we have questions for our delegation here, either for Dale or for Brooks? Any questions? Councillor Flynn, I thought you were going to press your button.
I've got lots of questions, but I think we learned a lesson 2 weeks ago, making any decisions or motions after a presentation. And so I'm suggesting that just to clarify, you're asking for $100,000 of taxpayers' money to support the team.
Yes.
Okay, and you're saying that you don't need it in cash, you're asking for it in lease reductions. But as I understand it, and I think this is part of the research we need to do, I think you're only really paying for your ice time about $40,000 after all the revenues and things. So I think we need to do a lot of work, and I'm probably at this table among the biggest fan of the Silverbacks, but I really see it being difficult and a little different in that Roots and Blues is a nonprofit. I'm also an avid member at the golf course, and the golf course would like us to help them as well, but that's not a city property. So there's real issues there. I just think you need to be aware of them, and I'm sure the mayor would have said what I'm saying. That all being said, we need to do some research, and I don't want to make any false promises. And I do want to say thank you for all you have done in the last 6 years, because the product on the ice, the relationship with minor hockey, all of that is so much better than it was 6 years ago. So you guys have done a great job. I just think it's important for you to understand we're dealing with taxpayers' dollars, and it's very difficult to spend taxpayers' dollars on private business. Now, I understand the financial because Lana shared it with me, and I'm on the EDS board. So I think council all needs to see that, and we need to get input from the Rec Society and from staff. But just to be clear, you're asking $100,000 for 5 years, sign a long-term agreement, that's that.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. Thank you for the presentation. So if I hear what you're saying this operation that you lead and you're involved in and you've invested in is bringing money to the town. It's just not bringing enough money, not enough of that money is getting back to the people who laid out the money in the first place. Was that a fair?
Yes, that's exactly it.
Yeah, Coffee Council, you laid out, the hotels are full. The hotels are doing better because the Silverbacks are here, and the restaurants are doing better so it's a distribution issue, right? Have you, on the private side of your business, I mean, you don't have to answer it. These are questions I would need an answer to before I made a decision. Have you thought about a model where part of your company would be a community contribution company? There might be tax advantages to that, although you don't pay tax, you don't make money. So you know, that part of your business model and presenting your own group with different scenarios, if we did this or we did this or we let this thing get bought out by this group or what have you, that would be very important. And then on our side, I mean, if we're going to enter any transaction, on our side, we have to do our own competitive analysis and is this a thing that has value to us? But the overarching challenge that we all face is under the Local Government Act, it is illegal to provide assistance to business, right? And so that's why the cash thing would never work, nor would it be an appropriate, because you're not asking us for $100,000. You're asking the people in the gallery, the neighbors who live next to you, the guy you play golf with. That's who you're asking the money for. So I think we should think less about what the ask is and try and focus more on what the problem is, right? And where is, are all the right players, all the right partners at the right table? Maybe they want to take a controlling interest because they know that it has value for them, but maybe they haven't been asked or engaged in a way that's compelling to them, or they don't even know that if it weren't for you, their hotel would be half empty, that sort of thing. So I just would ask you to be mindful of those things, to take a holistic approach, to recognize the challenges at this table and at REC, and that everyone here wants, we all want the same things, right? And we need to find a way, but there are some puzzle pieces that are really tough to fit together. So we're going to have to work this out together.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thank you, Worship. Thanks for the presentation, actually. And I know that you've been told this is part of the preferred process to come to speak to council. I think the ball's in our court now to do our homework has been suggested. I mean, we've been doing homework all along here, but doing homework and getting back in a timely fashion. So I think that is an expectation of us and should be an expectation of us, and we'll do that. I think you're also aware that there's some pretty high hurdles here about subsidization of business when it's a nonprofit. I realize it's a nonprofit, it's not making profit. It's a profit not making profit. I get that loud and clear, but we do have restrictions there. So I just want to thank you for the presentation. I've said before, we'll closely consider this. I will closely consider this and will continue to do so. There are high hurdles here though. And I know these are serious topics. I appreciated the goodwill and the good community relations that the Silverbacks have brought to the community and through the ownership here. So it's both measurable and immeasurable about that goodwill. And I was waiting for Councillor Flynn to do it actually, but and I know these are serious topics, but you do have a pro-am this Saturday. Do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Great, thank you.
6 p.m. Saturday?
6 p.m. Saturday.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I just ask you, Dale and Brooks, is there anything besides money that the city could do that would be of assistance to the Silverbacks and to your organization that we're not doing now?
Your Worship, just if I could answer, so a couple questions Councillor Flynn asked about so it is $100,000 with the rent and the ice time combined.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess it's just to answer Mrs. Lindgren's, Councillor Lindgren's one question, is that I don't know how in the BCHL there's one team that makes money. It's Prince George. All the other teams lose money. So there's no teams, Penticton, no one makes money. And there is, like Penticton, they've got a deal with the city of Penticton. And like Swift Current, basically the city owns that team. They support it because they bring in so much. So there is things, but I do, as per my presentation or our presentation, I 100% understand that it is a private business and that's the hurdle. But the goodwill that's brought forward that we can measure, again, I think that, again, respectfully, the request, you know, as per what we've tabled. But, yeah.
Okay, no, I appreciate that, and I think all of us here are fans and want the very best for the Silverback team, and I've had the pleasure of working with both of you in the Centennial Cup bid, and I know that your heart is here in Salmon Arm and really appreciate what you've done. So we will take the information that you've given us. Thank you for coming to council, and we will consider it and we will get back to you.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, council, we're moving along, and the only other piece we have is question and answer period. Is there questions from anyone in the gallery? I see no questions, so we will recess until 7 o'clock. Thank you. Welcome back to our council meeting, our evening session. We have an agenda in front of us. Is there any additions from staff to the agenda this evening?
Your Worship, there is one late letter which we're just getting now regarding the fee for service.
Okay, you'll distribute that to us?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Council, is there any additions to the agenda? Okay, seeing none. Councilors, any disclosure of interest? Okay, we'll move into our public hearing piece then, item 22, which is a fee for service amendment bylaw. And I'll just read the hearing procedure before we start. I'd like to open up the hearing for the fee for service amendment bylaw number 4343, which proposes to amend the development services fees. The Director of Development Services will explain the proposed amendment. I'll then ask 3 times for submissions from the gallery. Council will also have the opportunity to ask questions. Once this is complete, I will close the hearing. Third and final reading of the bylaw will be considered under Reconsideration of Bylaws. I'll pass it over to the Director of Development Services.
Thank you, Worship. This report proposes increases to a number of development services related fees that we have in the city, and we've had for at least 20 years, most of them, and there's a few new fees and applications proposed. Table 1 in the report on page 94 and 95 of the agenda outlines the proposed new application fees in relation to the current fees.
Thank you.
So along with that, I just want to say that not only did I look at other local government fees in the region and of similar size, but I also looked at the staff time involved and the costs for actually processing the fees, and analyzing those factors was really an opportunity to look at what our department does on a daily basis when it involves current planning. And I wanted to hone in on that idea of current planning, because I would say over 2017 and 2018, the busiest years on record for development here in Salmon Arm, I would say about 80% of our time has been focused on applications. Things have slowed down a little bit this year, but not significantly. I'd also like you to look on page 96, when you look at the comparison between building permit revenues and revenues from planning applications. And you can see the difference in fees. I break it down into the number of applications processed over 2017 and 2018. 434 building permit applications with an average application fee of $1,200. And the hotel, for example, is a huge revenue piece with a $10 million construction value, bringing in $66,500 in building permit revenue. And that's why we've seen big surpluses coming from building permit fees. ideally, we don't have surpluses. We're supposed to adjust things so that at most, you know, we recover at most 100%. In the planning department, recovering 100% is not possible unless we raise fees even much higher than what's being proposed here. And so I talk a little bit about other municipalities, mostly in Metro Vancouver area, that have very large fees, like Surrey, Coquitlam, more than $10,000 for an application fee, with the intent being to recover more of the staff time costs on a per hour basis. I broke down each application in terms of who works on applications in the city, and it crosses over from planning to engineering to administration. And you can have anywhere from 4 to 6 different people working on an application at different stages of the application. And the interesting thing about that analysis, in my point of view, was the average cost, or the average hourly rate, is about $55 an hour when you take the average of all the people that could be involved. And then when you think of $55 an hour and what we pay when we hire consultants to do work, that is certainly a bargain, because usually consultants charge well over $100 an hour. So I think people are getting good value for the service we provide. I realize that on a percentage basis, the increase is large. There's no question there. We're talking 20 years since they were last looked at. Mm-hmm. But if you compare them to other places, I think it's fair. And as far as feedback goes, Councillor Flynn, when he was chairing the last council meeting, requested that I follow up with Skip and the EDS, which I did, to make sure that they received the package. And Skip didn't respond, so I followed up again, and I still haven't heard anything from them. EDS has submitted an email on it, which I think you have now.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it and appreciate your work. So I'll be calling 3 times for any input on this fee structure for application fees. And after that, I will ask council if they have any questions before I close this part of the hearing. So asking for a first time, is there any input to the planning application fees? Asking for a second time. Asking for a third time. Council, do you have any questions that you would like to ask staff at this time? Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thank you, Worship. Thanks, Your Worship. Not a question so much as regarding Skip. They did send a notice to members, I'm a member, and including the date of this hearing. So it was a message acknowledged then. Okay.
Great, thank you. That's good information for us. Any other questions that councillors have? Okay, I have a couple of questions, and it's just so that I understand. In the chart on page 97, the conventional subdivision, which is the 4th one from the bottom, I had difficulty comparing, say, Kelowna or Lake Country to us. And what I'm wanting to find out is the actual, if you had a conventional subdivision of 20 lots, say, what the cost per lot would be in Salmon Arm under the new structure in comparison to, say, Vernon or Kelowna.
That's a tough one to do, like right now on the spot.
Okay, I understand. And that's why I'm asking.
We even have Your Worship, we even have a hard time calculating it for us only, yeah. Salmon Arm, because there's, for example, in Salmon Arm, there's presently the $200 fee, which you pay with the blue application, plus $50 per lot proposed to be created. Okay, then the application goes under review, it's referred out externally, internally. And then at the end of the process, if people want to follow through with the terms and conditions of the PLA letter, then they pay a $50 final approval fee, which is proposed to go up significantly to $500. I'll acknowledge that right now. Plus $500 for engineering department inspection fees, or $200 per lot that is being approved. Now that fee is proposed to go down slightly to just a flat $300 per lot created. And the logic there is we have found over the last 20 years that at the final plan approval stage, that is when the planners are spending a lot of time going over legal documents and making sure all the rights of ways, easements, covenants are all written up correctly. And a lot of times they're not. And we have to go back to the lawyer or the notary and ask for changes. And it's a mind-boggling experience to go through that. Now, so I talk about Salmon Arm, and then if we look over to
Could I just
Revelstoke?
walk through Salmon Arm just to make sure that I understand it? I think I've got it.
Sure.
So basically, if I was coming in and I wanted to do a 10-lot subdivision, it would cost me $200 flat base fee, then $50 per lot, which would be $500 based on 10. So that would be $700. Then it would cost me, with the new fee, $500 for final approval if I decided to go ahead. Not per lot, but just $500. And then it would cost me $500 or $200 per lot for engineering department inspection fees.
That would be the case now, except the engineering department inspection fees will be $300 per lot.
Okay, got it. Okay, so that would be, it would be $700 plus $500 plus $3,000, right? For a 10-lot subdivision?
Are you talking about now or with the new fees?
With the new fees.
Okay, so let's look at the first table. So with the new fees, it would be considered a standard application for more than 2 additional lots. So it'd be $1,000 to start.
Okay.
And with that, the applicant would eventually, within a few months, get a PLA letter.
Yep.
And with that PLA letter, the applicant can then legally market the property as being subdividable. And if they follow through with the terms and conditions of the PLA, they would come in with all their documents, the plans, the covenants, all that kind of stuff, with a $500 final approval fee plus $300 per new lot created.
So that's $4,500. Okay, got it. Can we just do one other? Can we do Vernon? Assuming again it's a 10-lot subdivision.
Okay, Vernon. $330 plus $330 per lot created. So $3,300 for the 10 lots plus $330 for the initial application.
Yeah, $3,660.
And that looks like it's it.
Yeah, because the other choice is $2,885 if number of lots is greater than 11.
That's right.
Okay. Okay, understand. All right. I understand how to work that out now. I have one other question. It was to do with the ALC application, ALR application. So the present is $1,500, $300 is retained by us. The new is $600 plus 300 in brackets, totally retained by us is 900. And then it says 1,000 slash per lot. Can you just explain that piece to me?
Sure. So right now, if somebody applies for an ALR subdivision or non-farm use application, the application is made to the ALC online.
Yep.
And then they get a notice back saying, we've received your application, go to the city and pay the money. The person comes to the city and presently gives us $1,500. Then their application is processed by staff. We hold the $1,500 in some GL account in finance department. And we hold it there for the time being, because if council ends up approving the application, supporting it, then we send the ALC a check for $1,200 and we keep $300.
Got it. That's what happens right now.
That's what happens right now.
Okay.
So what we're proposing is a higher surcharge. So when someone comes in to pay for their ALC application, they pay $1,200 plus $900.
Okay, that's how to read that.
Yeah.
We keep 900.
Yes.
We send the 1,200. What does the 1,000 slash per lot mean?
That would be for an exclusion application. And those applications are in a little bit of limbo right now because we don't know how they're going to work. We don't know, well, what I do know is landowners will not be able to apply themselves.
Right, right. Okay.
So the city will have to make the application. The city will have to be the applicant. So I'm proposing at this time $1,000 per lot fee.
I understand. So basically what we're doing is we're increasing the amount that we can retain from $300 to $900. And what the province gets, the $1,200 is set by the province.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Councillor Flynn.
Yeah, thank you for your questions, because specific to that one, I think the table would be more easily understood on that specific line if it said 1,200 to ALC in the new column.
Yeah.
Because it's confusing, because we're showing it one way on the left where the total's 1,500. Now the total is 2,100 with 1,200 going to the ALC and us getting 900 is the way I read it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that, can you go actually count Mayor Harrison's questions, created questions to me. So can you go back up to the one that he asked first, which was the explanation of the subdivision and the lot and.
Sure.
So I can't remember what number it was, or it's up a page, I think. Yeah. Okay, so, oh, maybe that's not it. Maybe it's the next page down. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, so it's right around here.
So, just so I'm clear, because one of my focuses, and I think staff's and the community's focus has been infill. So if you could go back up one.
Yes, that's for a minor right here.
Okay, so infill under 3 lots is 500. So the definition of minor is infill?
It matches the infill exemption, yes.
Okay. And then down below, standard could be less lots, but it's a standard new subdivision, not an infill?
And actually the standard is meant to be any proposal for more than 2 additional lots, in which case it would not qualify for the infill exemption of the servicing bylaw.
Okay. So minor is basically something that qualifies under the...
Yeah.
Okay.
That's how I tried to tie the two.
Okay. Yeah, I was concerned that a 2 lot subdivision was paying the same potentially as a much larger subdivision, but now that I know that we're still encouraging infill and recognizing that most people that do infill aren't developers, or not most, but probably half the time. So thank you.
Any further questions, Councillor Flynn?
No questions.
Okay. Council, I'm going to close this hearing in just a minute. Last opportunity to ask questions. Anyone from the gallery wish to speak to this? Okay, I'll declare this hearing closed on the fees for service amendment, and we'll reconsider it under reconsideration of bylaws. We'll now move to item number 23, which is our statutory public hearing. So I'll just read the opening statement first. So this public hearing for bylaw number 4341 is convened pursuant to section 464 of the Local Government Act. At this public hearing, anyone who believes their interest in property is affected by these matters will be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard or to present written submissions to council. If you wish to speak concerning the proposed bylaw, please approach council and begin your presentation by clearly stating your name and residential address. The function of council this evening is to receive the views of the public and ask questions regarding submissions. Council will not debate the merits of this proposal with individuals. Any background documents related to the bylaw and written submissions that have been received by the city are available for inspection by the public and are located in the binders on the table by the entry doors. All written submissions will be retained by the corporate officer for review by council and by members of the public. To ensure everyone a reasonable opportunity to be heard, the following rules of procedure have been established. 1, please direct all submissions to the chair. I'll then redirect questions to the correct staff person. Following introduction of the bylaw by city staff, the floor will be open for presentations, starting with the applicant and followed by other interested parties in the order in which the chair recognizes them. Presentations will not be limited unless the submission is not relevant to the proposed bylaw. There'll be 3 calls for submissions prior to the closing of the hearing. I ask everyone to respect the views of others. Try to keep your presentations as concise as possible. Legislation does not permit council to hear or receive submissions from the public after this hearing is closed. I would now ask the Director of Development Services to explain the proposal.
Your Worship, bylaw number 4341 proposes to rezone Lot 3, Plan EPP 73048, addressed at 1811 22nd Street Northeast, from R1 Single Family Residential Zone to R8 Residential Suite Zone. The owner and applicant are Kelly and Steve Bennett, and the property in question is designated medium density residential in the official community plan, and that designation supports the proposed R8 zoning.
Thank you. Are you Mr. and Mrs. Bennett? Hey, welcome. Would you like to come forward and say anything about your application? Okay, you're ready to answer questions if we have them then? Okay, thank you. I'll ask a second time if there's anyone in the gallery who would like to speak. Asking a third time. Council, do you have any questions for the applicant or for staff at this time? Seeing none, give a last opportunity. I'll declare this hearing closed. We'll now move to reconsideration of bylaws. Starting with the City of Salmon Arm Fee for Service Amendment Bylaw, number 4343, Development Service Fees. This is third and final reading. Is there a mover for this motion? Councillor Lyson and Councillor Flynn moves in second. I'll have the administrator read the motion.
Moved by Councillor Lyson, seconded by Councillor Flynn, that the bylaw entitled Fee for Service Amendment Bylaw number 4343 be read a third and final time.
Thank you. I'll open it up for comments by council. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Worship. And as the economic development representative, I was in a meeting on Friday morning, and the executive of economic development wanted to pass on to staff, as has been done by Lana in her email, commendation to staff for the hard work done and the very detailed analysis that's been done. It's unfortunate we're dealing with changes 20 years down the road, and therefore they look like they're significant changes, but to read a quick quote from the economic development staff person: when assessing comparative rates provided within your report, it is clear competitiveness was balanced with staff time costs when conducting the review process. Based on the information provided, the SAEDS board is supportive of the proposed fee structure for development services. And I have addressed the one concern that was brought forward to me on Friday, and it's not part of this, specifically the compassionate use. It's separate, and staff wants to see how those play out with the new ALC guidelines. So The only comment I would make is that the timing is unfortunate. I think part of the reason we haven't heard from Skip or much from EDS is that in the summers, all of our committees that we are part of don't meet. So it may be that it's just timing that people are busy, traveling, holidaying. But I say to Kevin, you've done a great job with this. We're still very competitive, if not perhaps even still at the lower end. And I think you've provided very sound logic and reasoning for the changes you've made, even if we don't completely understand them.
Thank you very much, Councillor Flynn. Other comments from council? Seeing none, I'll just make my comments briefly. Thanks also to Director of Development Services and your department for the research that went into the report. And I think, like Councillor Flynn, our new rates are very competitive with our neighboring communities. And I think that's important. We're lower in almost every category, but not substantially lower. And we are recovering more of our cost of staff time that it takes to work through these applications that come to council. So I will support the application fees as proposed. Will these click into place right after fourth reading?
We are ready to change the digits on the application forms tomorrow morning.
Okay, all right. If there's no other comments, I will call the question then. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll now go to item number 2, City of Salmon Arm Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4341, Bennett, 1811 22nd Street Northeast, R1 to R8, third reading. We have the motion on the screen. Do we have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Wallace-Richmond, Councillor Lavery. Thank you. I'll have the administrator read the motion.
Moved by Councillor Wallace-Richmond, seconded by Councillor Lavery, that the bylaw entitled Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4341 be read a third time.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from council? Seeing none, thank you very much for putting forward your application. I think it's a perfect spot for an R8. So I'll call the question to council. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. I have a question and answer period. Does anyone in the audience have a question that they would like to ask us? Seeing none, we have a motion to adjourn.
Moved by Councillor Lyson, seconded by Councillor Flynn, that the regular council meeting of July 22nd, 2019 be adjourned. All
those in favor? Thank you very much. Thank you, gallery. Thank you, staff and council. That's me tomorrow. My turn tomorrow.